18 months after Thomas died, thrown from his horse on a muddy October morning, leaving her with a mortgaged farm, $30, and a 4-year-old girl named Iris. Eleanor had finally let her neighbor Me talk her into going. "You can't grieve forever," Me had said, pinning a ribbon into Eleanor's hair. "Iris needs a father, you need a life." Eleanor had told herself the same thing all the way to town. The Millhaven church hall smelled of pine resin and sugar cake. Women in pressed calico arranged dishes on long tables. Men stood in clusters near the door, clean-shaved and stiff in their Sunday collars. Eleanor smoothed her skirt and walked in with Iris on her hip, the little girl's dark curls tucked under a white bonnet. The room didn't stop, but it slowed. She felt it the way a body feels a draft before it finds the open window, eyes sliding toward her, then toward Iris, then away. Margaret Hensley, the Reverend's wife, was the first to speak directly. "Mrs. Voss," a smile so practiced it had no warmth left in it, "how brave of you to come out. Thank you for having us." "Of course," Margaret's gaze dropped to Iris, "although I wasn't aware you'd be bringing the child." "She's 4, Eleanor said. "I don't leave her alone." "No, naturally not." Another smile. "It's only some of the gentlemen this evening are looking for a fresh start, an unencumbered arrangement, you understand." Eleanor understood perfectly. She found a seat at the end of a table and set Iris down with a piece of cornbread. 3 men came to speak with her over the next 2 hours. Each one smiled at Eleanor, looked at Iris, and found somewhere else to be before the conversation finished. A 4th didn't sit down at all, just stood at the edge of her space, looked at the little girl, and walked away without a word. By 8 o'clock, Iris had fallen asleep against Eleanor's shoulder. The room was pairing off around them. Laughter, the scrape of chairs, someone's husband squeezing his wife's hand. Eleanor was reaching for her shawl when she heard it, 2 women behind the partition, voices low but not low enough. "She seems pleasant enough." Pleasant doesn't change what she comes with. A man wants his own children, not to raise another man's get. And that little one's so dark. Thomas Voss was fair as wheat, everyone knew it. A pause. "Well, some women make their own problems and then expect a town to solve them." Eleanor's hand had gone still on her shawl. Iris stirred, murmured something in her sleep, and Eleanor pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. She was not going to cry, not here. She stood, settled Iris against her shoulder, and walked toward the door. She almost made it. He was standing just outside, one shoulder against the frame, a tin cup in his hand and no particular expression on his face. Tall, trail-worn in a way that Sunday clothes couldn't quite cover, there was dust in the crease of his boots and a scar that ran pale along his jaw. He was watching the road, not the party, which was how Eleanor nearly walked straight into him. She caught herself. Iris didn't wake. "Pardon me," Eleanor said. He stepped aside immediately. "My fault, shouldn't block a doorway." She would have kept walking. She had every intention of keeping walking. But Iris chose that moment to lift her head, blink at the stranger with sleepy brown eyes, and say, with great seriousness, "Your hat's got a hole in it." The man looked down at the little girl. Then he reached up and touched the brim of his hat, where there was, indeed, a small moth-eaten gap near the crown. "You're right," he said, "it does. Mama could fix it. She fixes everything." "Iris," Eleanor said quietly. "It's a fair offer." His voice was even, not charmed the way men performed charmed, just straightforward like a statement about weather. He looked at Eleanor then. "You leaving already?" "We were never really here." He glanced past her into the hall, and something moved behind his eyes, recognition of the particular kind of quiet that follows cruelty. He'd seen it somewhere before, she thought, or maybe worn it himself. "Jude Calloway," he said, and held out his hand. She shook it because Iris was watching, and she was teaching her daughter that courtesy was not weakness. "Eleanor Voss." "Where are you headed, Mrs. Voss?" Home 3 miles east. Alone this time of night. We manage. He nodded slowly, as though filing that away. Then he set his tin cup on the rail post, straightened up to his full height, and said, not as a question and not as a command, but as a simple statement of fact. You're coming with me. I'll get my horse and drive you in your wagon. You shouldn't be on that road after dark with a child. Alina stared at him. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know what a room full of people looks like when they've decided they're better than someone, and I know what it costs to walk out of one. He picked up his hat, ran a thumb over the hole, and looked at Iris. Besides, I've got a hat that needs fixing. Iris beamed. Alina told herself. She said yes because of the dark road and the 3 miles and the wisdom of practical decisions. It had nothing to do with the fact that he was the first person all evening who had looked at her daughter and stayed. Jude Calloway drove a wagon like he had no argument with the world, steady hands, easy pace, no need to fill silence with noise. The road unrolled dark ahead of them, the lantern throwing a small gold circle they moved through together. Iris fell back asleep in Alina's lap within minutes. Alina sat straight and watched the tree line and tried to remember how to talk to a man who hadn't already decided what she was worth. You weren't inside long, she finally said. Long enough. You didn't find what you were looking for. He was quiet for a moment. The horse's hooves were soft on the dirt. I wasn't looking for anything. Me Briggs said there'd be decent food. She wasn't wrong about the pie. Alina almost smiled. Me is rarely wrong about pie. She said other things too. He kept his eyes on the road. About a woman who needed to get out of the house. Said she'd been carrying a lot alone for a long time. Alina's spine stiffened. Me talks too freely. She worries about you. I don't need worrying over. No, he said, and his voice carried no argument. You look like a woman who handles things. I'm not disputing that. She didn't know what to do with a man who said something like that without following it with a but. Thomas had been a good man, she believed that still, but his praise had always come hinged. You're capable, but you're stubborn. You're strong, but you're difficult. The praise and the correction always paired, like they couldn't let a compliment stand on its own feet. What is it you do, Mr. Calloway? Cattle work mostly. I've got a small place up near the ridge, 20 head. A bunkhouse that leaks on the east wall, and more fence line than one man can reasonably maintain. You have no one to help you. Had a hand last season. He married and moved to Tucson. A pause. People do that. She heard something in it, not self-pity, just an honest accounting of how things go. She looked at his profile in the lantern light, the scar along his jaw, the careful way he held the reins, loose but attentive. The women inside, he said after a while, what they said about Iris. Alina went very still. You heard that. Sound carries in those old halls. She said nothing. It wasn't right, he said, just that. No elaboration, no performance of outrage. 3 words delivered the same way he'd pointed out a stone in the road plainly because it was true. Alina looked down at Iris, at the dark curls spread across her lap. Her daughter, who had her grandmother's coloring and her grandfather's nose and not one single feature that said Thomas Voss, and who'd been answering for that with her whole 4-year-old life without even knowing there was anything to answer for. She's mine, Alina said, and she meant it as the full and complete end of every question anyone had ever raised. Yes, Jude said, she is. They rode the rest of the way in a quiet that, for the first time in 18 months, didn't feel like loneliness. The farm looked smaller at night. It always did. The dark pressed the edges in, made the porch sag more, made the fence seem further gone. Alina saw it every evening and had taught herself to see it as hers instead of failing. But tonight, with someone else seeing it for the first time, the old shame flickered. Jude brought the wagon to an easy stop and didn't say anything about the fence. He climbed down, came around, and held up his hands for Iris without being asked, just opened them, as if it were the most natural thing, and waited. Alina hesitated 1/2 second, then lowered her sleeping daughter into his arms. He held the child against his chest with the ease of someone who'd done it before, or perhaps someone who was careful with breakable things on instinct. Alina climbed down herself and took Iris back at the porch steps. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride." "You're welcome." He should have left then. She expected him to leave. Instead, he stood at the foot of her steps with his ruined hat in his hand and looked at the dark farmhouse and said, quietly, "Is there wood inside for the stove?" "I can manage." "I know you can, not impatient, just steady. Is there wood?" She thought about the empty box beside the kitchen stove, and the cord she hadn't had time to split, and the morning that would come cold. "Not much," she admitted. He nodded, put his hat back on, and walked around the side of the house to the wood pile. Alina stood on the porch with her sleeping daughter and listened to the clean sound of an axe in the dark, rhythmic, unhurried, no performance in it, just a man doing a thing that needed doing. She didn't know what to call the feeling that moved through her. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was older than that, more basic. It was the feeling of not being alone in the work. He brought 2 armloads to the porch, stacked them neatly, and dusted his hands. "That'll last you a few days. I can come back Thursday and split the rest of that cord if you'll allow it." She looked at him for a long moment. Iris breathed softly against her neck. The crickets were loud in the dark grass. "Why?" she asked, not suspicious, genuinely asking. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Calloway." He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "No," he said, "but I've got a hat with a hole in it and your daughter made a promise on your behalf, and I was raised not to let a woman and a child go cold if I can help it." He met her eyes. "That's all it is, Mrs. Voss. No angle to it." She believed him. That was the strangest part. "Thursday then," she said. He nodded once, put his hat on, and walked back to the wagon. She watched the lantern until it disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she carried Iris inside, laid her in the small bed, pulled the quilt up to her chin, and sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark. She put her hand over her mouth and let herself cry, not from grief this time, but from something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten it had a weight to it.